Day 732 of the Trump administration, now halfway through the president's first term in office. The end of these first 2 years is now marked by the longest government shutdown in history. By the time this broadcast is over, the government will have been closed for exactly 1 month. This is also the day the nation honors Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Trump spent 2.5 minutes at his memorial in Washington today, accompanied by Vice President Pence. And the Washington Post noted this milestone for the administration. The paper's fact-checker database shows that 2 years after taking office, Trump has made 8,158 false or misleading claims. Misstatements and shifting claims also seem to be the hallmarks of the explanations about the president's ties to Russia. Over the past 24 hours, remarks from Trump lawyer Rudy Giuliani appear to have raised more questions about those ties, particularly where they involve Michael Cohen and a potential Trump Tower Moscow. Cohen is expected to testify before the House Oversight Committee next month. Back in 2017, he had testified to Congress that discussions about the Moscow project ended in January of 2016. He later admitted that was a lie while pleading guilty to special counsel Robert Mueller. And just yesterday, we got a new version of the timeline from Giuliani.
Well, it's our understanding that they went on throughout 2016. Weren't a lot of them, but there were conversations. Can't be sure of the exact dates, but the president can remember having conversations with him about it.
Throughout 2016?
The president also remembered. Yeah, probably could be up to as far as October, November. Our answers cover until the election. So anytime during that period, they could have talked about it.
So just to clarify, talks of Trump Tower Moscow went as late as October or November of 2016, even in some form.
Could be.
As far as the president was concerned, an active project to at least October or November of 2016, an active potential deal.
Yeah, I would say an active proposal.
Our answers cover into the election. And lest you think that was a slip up, Giuliani went on to give an interview to the New York Times the same day in which he quoted Donald Trump as saying the Trump Tower Moscow discussions were, quote, going on from the day I announced to the day I won. The Times adds all this would mean Trump was seeking a deal while calling for an end to sanctions against Russia, while questioning the legitimacy of NATO. And in July 2016, when he called on Russia to release hacked Democratic emails. Late today, Rudy Giuliani tried to clean up his comments regarding Trump and Cohen's discussions on Trump Tower Moscow, telling NBC News, my recent statements were hypothetical and not based on conversations I had with the president. My comments did not represent the actual timing or circumstances of any such discussions. Giuliani isn't alone when it comes to giving new and different accounts of Trump's dealings with Russia. Trump's own explanations have shifted, starting with his comments during the campaign.
I have nothing to do with Russia. I have nothing to do with Russia. And even for anything, what do I have to do with Russia?
We could make deals in Russia very easily if we wanted to. I just don't want to because I think that would be a conflict.
It was a well-known project. It was during the early part of 16, and I guess even before that. It lasted a short period of time. I didn't do the project. I decided not to do the project, so I didn't do it. I was focused on running for president. There would be nothing wrong if I did do it. There was a good chance that I wouldn't have won, in which case I would have gone back into the business, and why should I lose lots of opportunities?
Meanwhile, a New York Times article by Peter Baker, who's standing by to join us tonight, raises new questions about Trump's motives concerning the Kremlin. Baker looks at the disparity between Trump's statements and his administration's actions. He writes that when it comes to responding to Russian aggressions, quote, according to current and former administration officials, Mr. Trump has gone along with such actions only reluctantly or under pressure from advisors or Congress. He has left it to subordinates to publicly criticize Russian actions while personally expressing admiration for Mr. Putin and eagerness to be friends. And with that, let's bring in our leadoff panel for a Monday night. Peter Baker, Chief White House correspondent for the New York Times, Barbara McQuade, former U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Michigan, and Jeremy Bash is here, former Chief of Staff at the CIA and the Pentagon and former counsel to House Intel. Peter Baker, it's your paper's great reporting and your great piece on this sort of gulf between Trump's statements and sentiments that he's revealed in tweets and in public comments and private meetings, and things that the national security apparatus has tried to do or has pulled him toward. Talk about the state of play tonight.
Well, that's exactly right. Look, I mean, what we looked at was the president's own defense in this Russia matter. He says, look, I've been far tougher on Russia than any of my predecessors. And, you know, he has a point to the extent that you talk about what his administration has done. His administration has taken actions that have been tougher on Russia in some ways than his predecessors, than the Obama or Bush administrations, among them, you know, sending Javelin weapons to Ukraine, increasing sanctions that hadn't been put on before, you know, threatening to cancel the INF treaty and so forth. But what you find in these instances, in some of the instances anyway, the president seems to be going along only because he's been pushed into it or basically pressured by Congress. Congress, for instance, passed legislation mandating sanctions on Russia almost unanimously, bipartisan majorities. The president grumbled about it, was very unhappy about it, but realized he couldn't veto it because it would be overridden. So there is this disparity between his defense, which is I am tough on Russia, and his own sort of reaction to these policies that his own administration has put in place.
Peter Baker, is there a single example of a single policy that your paper has covered or any other news organization that you've seen in 2 years where Donald Trump has led a single policy discussion to a position that's tougher on Russia?
Well, it's hard to find one. I mean, I think that, you know, what you heard from some of the people in his administration is the decision to cancel or withdraw from the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty. This is the Reagan Treaty from the 1980s, was something that he himself kind of got out in front on. There were allegations that Russia had cheated on that treaty. But you're right. In general, when it comes to, for instance, expelling diplomats in response to the poisoning of the former Russian spy in Britain, that was something his advisors told him to do because they told him, look, maybe there are Russian assassins here on American territory who are planning to do the exact same thing here. And if you don't take a tough enough action, they might actually not be deterred. He went ahead with that and even afterwards then grumbled that Europe hadn't done enough of their own expulsions. So it's this sort of push and pull between a president who clearly desires to have a good relationship with Vladimir Putin and the dynamics around him, including his own administration, that's pushing the other direction.
Jeremy Bash, Peter Baker is as straight of a shooter as we can find and knows a whole lot about this part of the world. But isn't the stack of actions he's taken that are pro-Russia just staggering? And now on top of that, the revelation that the FBI was so concerned that he was actually not just pro-Putin, but an agent of Putin, that they opened a counterintelligence investigation. What else are we waiting for?
Yeah, I don't think I can buy the argument that somehow Trump's been tough on Russia. In fact, I think just the opposite's in fact the case. With respect to the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, that's something that Putin has long desired, which is to scrap the treaty. In fact, Russia's been developing weapons that have been an abrogation of that treaty. So in some ways, by us pulling out, we've allowed Russia to go forward with the development of these hypersonic weapons. And right down the line, on issue after issue, the Trump administration has resisted sanctions. The Trump administration has not put in place aggressive sanctions, second wave of sanctions in response to the Skripal attempted assassination. We have not called out Russia, obviously, for their election meddling. In fact, Trump, next to Putin, took the word of the KGB spy master over our own intelligence agencies. And here again, with the withdrawal, the hasty withdrawal from Syria, that was a gift to the Kremlin because the Kremlin has had Assad as their client for many, many years, and they wanted to see Russian hegemony in the Middle East. So again, I don't think there's any merit to the fact that the Trump administration has been, quote, tough on Russia. And on the broader issue, Nicole, as you point out, with respect to these Giuliani comments, the heart of every counter-espionage case looks at financial leverage, looks at whether or not the target of an investigation is somehow beholden, somehow indebted to a foreign handler. And if, in fact, it's true, as Giuliani seemed to acknowledge, that the financial transaction was going up until the day that Trump took office, or up until the day he was elected president, I should say, then in fact we see the extent, the breadth of the financial leverage that the Russian Federation has had over the putative president of the United States.
Robert McQuaid, Jeremy Bash just there at the end of his answer made a correction to reflect Rudy Giuliani's current position, that the answers they gave Robert Mueller, and that was something that he said that I heard like a dog, a hunting dog hears a high-pitched whistle, turned my head to the side. Rudy Giuliani, in his public appearances, is being faithful to sort of one thing, and that is his belief or his understanding of the written responses that Donald Trump turned into Robert Mueller. And what I heard in that response is that we have turned in an answer to a question from Robert Mueller that must have been along the lines of, how long or when did you discuss Trump Tower Moscow with Michael Cohen? And Rudy seemed to reveal yesterday in front of all of us that that answer allows for Donald Trump to have been talking, and I believe 10 times is a figure either in the sentencing memo for Cohen or somewhere else. 10 times Michael Cohen briefed the president and his family members about Trump Tower Moscow. That's what Rudy Giuliani said yesterday. That in and of itself, having worked on presidential campaigns, would have been decisive, would have been devastating, that this man was running for president while trying to build a hotel in Moscow. What does that revelation mean legally?
I think it's hard to know exactly what it means, but I think it is significant when coupled with what Michael Cohen has pleaded guilty to, and that is lying about the timing of the Trump Tower Moscow project. Because in order for that to be a crime, that lie has to be material. So when President Trump says things like, I had every right to continue with my business in case I lost, it was very legal and very cool, all of those kinds of things, Robert Mueller doesn't think so. By having Michael Cohen plead guilty to that, he is saying that he thinks it is material that those negotiations continued into the summer, and perhaps, if you take Rudy Giuliani at what he said yesterday, even up until the time of the election. And so that timing is going to be very important to their understanding of, as Jeremy says, perhaps a motivation about Russians having leverage over President Trump. So I don't know exactly why it matters, but it matters.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.